Hey, welcome back to Conversing Labs. This is Conversing Labs Cafe. We're doing a bunch of talks with people who are presenting at this year's RSA Conference out in San Francisco. And I'm very happy to welcome into the Conversing Labs studio Steve Lipner from SAFECODE. Steve, welcome, and welcome to Conversing Labs. Great to see you again.
Thanks, Paul. Glad to join you. Glad to be back.
So could you just tell us a little bit for audience members who aren't familiar with you and your work, the work that you do?
I've been doing what we'd now call cybersecurity since the late 1970. And for the last 22 years, I've been focused on secure software development, how do organizations build software that can resist attack. I did that at Microsoft from 1999 through 2015, retired there as the director of software security and leader of the security development lifecycle team. SAFECODE is an organization that was created by Microsoft and a number of other industry players to share best practices in secure software development, both among the members and with the community at large. I had been the board chair there before I retired and joined them as executive director at the beginning of 2017. It's a small organization, but it's done a lot to help the community, I think.
And yeah, just tell us a little bit, what is SafeCode's role? Like, how do you work with organizations around some of these issues around software security?
So we're a member organization. As I said, we're very small. Not a lot of paid staff. So when we do things, it's because the members and employees of the members decide to do them or want to do them. And what we've done is released a batch of free guidance, advice, recommendations in the form of white papers, blog posts, occasional tweets. Here are the things that you ought to be thinking about as you attempt to make the software that your organization delivers secure. We've done that primarily ourselves. We've occasionally partnered with other organizations, notably the Cloud Security Alliance and the Center for Internet Security.
So as you mentioned, I mean, you were integral to Microsoft's trustworthy computing initiative and secure software embrace of kind of secure software development. Going back to the early part of just around the millennium. Talk just. I mean, I think Microsoft really is one of the companies that has been most successful in embracing these concepts of secure development lifecycle, right? And really actually kind of putting their money where their mouth is in terms of making organizational changes to realize better security out the other end. Can you talk just a little bit about the experience of being within the company during that period and what lessons you took away from that?
I go back to Code Red and NIMDA, Slammer, Blaster, if people remember some or all of those. And so
I think Slammer came out in my first week as a cybersecurity reporter. It was a trial by fire.
Good timing.
Good timing. Yeah. I think this job's going to keep me busy.
I have war stories from Slammer. It certainly kept me busy around then.
Yeah, but which was a SQL Server vulnerability for those of you who weren't born then. Yeah, right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess that's a risk. People who weren't born then. So the things we did, we decided, that the security initiative initially came out of the product groups, the organizations that built the software. And what we decided, just because that seemed like the natural thing to do, was that the way we were going to get our software security better was by organizing, training, and equipping our developers to build more secure software. And that was the mindset in the Windows security push in 2002, and that was the mindset in the security development lifecycle team when we created it in 2004. And that, I believe, has it certainly was in place in 2015 when I retired. And to the best of my knowledge, it's still the way they do it. And I'm a strong believer that you get secure software not by bringing people in from the outside to try to find all the bugs, because they can't, but by having your developers motivated and trained and equipped to write secure software, find out where they've made security mistakes, fix them as they go, and also, so that's one piece, and the other is continuous improvement. You're not going to get perfect software, but you're gonna learn lessons when you make mistakes, and the key thing then is to update your process, update your training, update your tools, so that you fix not only what's reported, but all its friends and relations, all the other mistakes that are like that.
And also, I would say really kind of prioritizing security. I can remember in the early days of that shift when you kind of stood up secure development lifecycle, like there were a number of planned releases that slipped
Mm-hmm.
because of security issues. So Microsoft was saying we were planning on releasing this is what we told you, but we're actually pushing it back because there's still more to do. We haven't addressed all the security issues. And it was as a journalist, it was like, oh my god. Um, but I'm not sure that many companies out there right now are adhering to that or clearing that bar. Are saying, we've identified some security issues here in what we're pushing out, and so we're gonna miss it. Either miss this, the sprint or whatever. But what are your thoughts?
Well, certainly, during the SDL days, or during and even the Windows security push, we took schedule hits to get on track with secure releases. I think, I mean, a lot of the companies I work with, the companies I work with in SafeCode, and a lot of others that I run into that are not SafeCode members, have secure development processes and have commitments, and do to the best of their ability, um, you know create and release secure code. I'm not saying everybody's perfect. I'm not saying it's uniform. It's always a risk management decision what you fix and what you ship. But organizations, that have been through that, generally understand the price of shipping something that you ought to have fixed, and there's a bias toward doing it right. The other thing is that, that I talked about risk management. Risk management has to be informed, and when you have a secure development team, um, you know, its role in addition to the training and tools is to have somebody, at a senior enough level to explain, okay, here's what might happen if we ship with this, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then if you're gonna accept the risk, at least you're gonna accept it knowingly.
Mm-hmm.
And often, when you go into somebody and you say, well, blah 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 risk, blah 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 blaster, um, that that will end the conversation.
Um, So you're out at RSA. You gave a presentation on Monday, and supply chain security, the security of supply chain security and the security of development, pipelines and
Hmm.
development
Hmm.
processes
Hmm.
is really top of mind. It's a big theme. If you just sort of count the number of presentations that are about software supply chain or DevSecOps, it's a lot of them. Um, Obviously, we can kind of there were solar winds and code code. There have been a bunch of incidents that have happened in the last couple of years that highlight this incident. what is your sense about why right now this is what everybody is talking about? How do we explain its moment?
Right. I think a lot of the explanation of the moment is in fact because of solar winds, and then to a considerable extent log4j. I mean, we've seen from time to time other intrusions into development environments,
Mm-hmm.
into repositories, um, more or less restricted or focused. But I think solar winds really got a lot of people's and organizations' attention. Of course, there's the U.S. government focus and the executive order as well, and so it's part of the it's part of the process of building secure and delivering secure software. I mean, we had been talking about supply chain security, actually both at Microsoft and at SafeCode back in
Mm.
2009, 10, 11. If you go back to the SafeCode website, you can find a paper on supply chain security and code
Mm.
integrity from
Mm.
a couple of papers from 2010. So it not a new issue. I think
Not at all.
Microsoft, we created our software, our supply chain and code integrity policy around 2010, 10 maybe, but maybe 8 or 9.
Mm.
And so, it's something that you just aware of. I don't know why we became aware of it initially, but it's just a natural thing to worry about. And so, um, bigger organizations become more aware of it sooner. The broad awareness is also good because back to the supply chain, everybody depends on lots of stuff they didn't write, and so it's good to have
Right.
that understanding broadly.
Right, and that does seem to be one of the issues that we're seeing play out now. Is I think maybe one of the things that's changed in the last 20 years, right, is just increased reliance on third-party code, whether it's open source or
Mm-hmm.
commercial, proprietary third-party, libraries and modules and so on. And that's kind of the way applications and services get built these days, right? Is
It is
is in a very
it is
yeah
indeed. I mean,
yeah
people integrate components. They integrate commercial components. They integrate uh, open source components. They copy stuff off Stack Overflow, and you know and
literally copy,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
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 and so
yeah.
that's the way it is. I was going to say it's fine. It's reality. Um, but the important thing is that people understand that security is part of that equation. And what are you going to do to make sure that the software you deliver to your customers, um, either on-prem or online, is secure and is taken best practices into account.
So, what is the you know advice that you would have? I know one of the concepts that you talk about, or that you were talking about in your presentation, is this notion of you know uh, how best to do supply chain security. We talk about supply chain security again because that's the old kind of from the industrial world or
Mhm.
manufacturing world. That's a notion that we're all familiar with. Let's find make sure all the components aren't compromised or counterfeit, and let's just apply that to software. Does that model actually work in the modern context of software agile software development? Is it applicable? And if so, what do companies need to do to get up and running with this if they're not doing it already?
So the concept is pretty good. I mean, the session we did at RSA, um, Tony Sager from Center for Internet Security and I were the
Mm.
speakers, and John Pescatori from SANS was an original contributor, uh, who had planned we had planned to have as the other as a speaker, and he did a lot of work on the slides. His term, his contribute, he referred to the supply web or the
Yeah.
and so there's just a lot of stuff flowing into any modern software project. Okay,
Mm.
and going back to the earliest days of the Microsoft SDL, we
Mm.
said you need to know what the components are that you're using that you don't build. Okay, and that's sort of a law of nature, if you will. No,
What other people's code are we relying on?
yeah, what other people's code are
Mm-hmm.
you relying on? Initially, at Microsoft, we were concerned about another group in Microsoft, but it still
Mm-hmm.
applies.
Mm-hmm.
What are you shipping, and why do you believe it's secure, and what are you going to do if there's a vulnerability found? There's a
Mm-hmm.
SafeCode document, uh, practices for using third-party components. Something that's approximately the title.
Mm-hmm.
That we released probably 4 or 5 years ago. Still applies. Main thing is knowing, having an inventory, having a way to discover if there are vulnerabilities found, having a way to assess the impact of those vulnerabilities on what you shipped, and then having a servicing plan to get well if you need to. And that applies just across the board, whether it's a couple of lines in somewhere that you copied, or whether it's a big
Mm.
component that you're shipping or hosting on your service.
So you mentioned the executive order. President Biden issued a cyber executive order earlier back in 2021, basically calling on the government agencies to address supply chain security, among other things, to start looking into using software bills of material, and there was a lot in the order, um, with the goal, obviously, of kind of shoring up the defenses of the government agencies. What impact do you think has that had practically? And are we when we see the fruits of that executive order?
Well, I mean, the impact is a work in progress, and the way that the government is going to require attestation to the
Hmm.
requirements of the executive order by its suppliers of software is
Yeah.
still not finalized. But I talked to the SafeCode members, and they're all already worrying and taking action to make sure they're prepared to demonstrate that they're meeting meeting the requirements of the executive order. And the nice, I'm very much a fan of the executive order, or part section 4, which is sort of the software supply chain piece. I'm very much a fan of that because it requires sort of sensible things that you would do if you had a software security program.
Hmm.
So if the government's requiring people to do that, if I think that's cool. Um,
Hmm.
Software bill of materials is a piece of that. It's a major manifestation of the supply chain side, and yeah, that's the formalism of the bill of materials, and the bill of materials format is less important, but requiring people to know what they're shipping is
Yeah.
is real important.
Right.
It's primarily for the developer. The developer needs to know what's in their code, so that if
Right.
something goes wrong, they can find it and
Right.
remediate.
This was what Log4j kind of underscored for us, and we were talking about SQL Slammer. In some ways, SQL Slammer actually raised this issue as well, because if I remember, there were all these products that actually used aspects of like Microsoft Access, for example, that initially people didn't think was vulnerable, ended up being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Log4j is the latest example, hugely widely used open source library, but who's using it directly or indirectly, really hard to know.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, you just triggered my PTSD, and I haven't thought. I probably haven't thought of that in 15 years. Where there was something called MSDE, which was
Yeah,
SQL Server by another name for embedding into other
right,
applications, and
right.
it turned
So you had all
out
these
to
desktops that were getting
also,
slammer, and people,
yeah,
right,
it all turned out to also, have the slammer vulnerability. And so, we had to go around and build a
yeah,
tool to enable organizations to find where they had MSDE and and
right.
and update it. Um, I could have gone all day without thinking about that, but but you know but but
Just
but today, similar. You got to know what you're shipping, and you've got to be prepared to
right.
remediate, and that's the focus. A lot of good stuff in the executive order. A lot of good stuff in the secure software development framework, which is NIST's guidance on secure development, including both development practices and supply chain repository protection. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's basically it's a brief document, but it's very very
Mm-hmm.
complete, very actionable, very good guidance for developers.
Do you think organizations, Reversing Labs did a survey on this of developers, small population, 300, 350 respondents, but they were basically sort of like, yeah, SBOM's a great idea, but we don't have the expertise internally, we don't have the budget, we don't have the, I mean, it was all the sort of like, yeah, yeah, it's great, it's useful, really help us, but I don't know if we can do it because of all these other, um, contingent issues, staffing, expertise, knowledge, and all these other things. So, I mean, is that going to play out at scale here as organizations try and implement this idea that is really more about, it's not a technical implementation; it's more of an operational, procedural thing.
Yeah. So I mean, you if you're building software, so there are two things. Okay, there's SBOM, you know, sort of capital S, capital B, et cetera. As a sort of a specific set of formats and tools and stuff. And the SBOM requirements, I think, that came out of NIST, I think that's where they came from, are just some sort of fundamental things. What's it
Mm.
called? What's it called? And where is it?
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe a checksum, date and a checksum to make sure you know what version you've got. Um, at some level, I mean, if you're building software, you've got to have a configuration management system and a repository. Okay, and so if if you're including this component in the build, you've got to have some way of picking it up and including it. And if you know that and you have a way of querying that, you know, I tend to think that ought to meet the SBOM requirement. The important thing is to know what you're shipping, and
yeah,
and ideally, I mean, ideally you'd get an SBOM from your suppliers so that you'd know what they've incorporated and all the way down. The government working groups on SBOM have sort of talked about, how much of that can we do? How long will it take? I think that's still a work in progress. But the focus on knowing what you're shipping is the key thing, not exactly how you do it. And I guess, you can do it. You can do it in a way that's expensive, but I'm not sure I agree that you have to do it in a way that's expensive.
okay. Final question, Steve. How do we how do we lift all boats here with software security? Again, you were there at Microsoft, where company made some very substantial changes and improvements in its practices and the outcomes. How do we do that across this huge, now amorphous industry that isn't just, you know, born and bred, software companies, but actually every company, companies making home appliances and everything else.
So that's a great question. One of the, I mean, part of, things like the executive order and customers, business customers, enterprise customers, probably going to get on board and ask, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
do you meet the EO requirements? Do you implement the SSDI? I think that'll be helpful, um, and that'll get to a lot of organizations that are building and shipping software. I think the other piece of that I would love to see is more, sort of bottom up. Um, I really would like to see the people who are educating and training software developers um, include, you want your code to be fast, you want your code to be correct, you want your code to be memory efficient. Maybe we ought to say you want your code to be secure. That's a
Mm-hmm.
is that another
Mm-hmm.
property that people ought to be taught as they learn to program? That would sort of be a paradigm shift, a culture shift.
Sure would.
The education system isn't doing as much of that as it should,
Yeah.
and I would love to see some encouragement in the system that got that message out.
Steve, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to say?
I think you've done a good job of covering
Thanks.
covering the landscape.
Great.
Uh, the RSA conference is back. It's live. It was fun to be here and see people in person after 2.5 years.
Okay. I hope you have your mask on when you're outside of your hotel room, Steve.
Try to do that. Try to do that. Yes.
Hey, Steve Lipner, thank you so much of SafeCode. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us on Conversing Labs. It was a real pleasure to speak with you again, and we hope to have you on again.